G'day ladies and gents, welcome to War Thunder with Mags, and welcome aboard Pokryshkin's P-39N-0 Airacobra. This is a Russian premium Airacobra that has been available to unlock in the recent event. Now for this battle we're on Calican Gol, and we're primarily fighting A6M20s and Ki-61s. Now before we get too deep into this is not a guide on how to fly the Airacobra. This was me taking this premium out for a second flight, and I really just wanted to derp around in the aircraft. It's been a long time since I've flown a P-39 of any kind, and wanted to see exactly what it was capable of these days. Being in a fight against the Japanese, perfect opportunity to see exactly how well this thing turns in combat, and how well I can make it maneuver against aircraft that are absolutely more maneuverable than it is. So I've just gone through a series of wide banking turns to try and put this Ki-61 directly in front of me. It goes through the vertical, opens itself up for a potential attack. I get a couple of big hits, unfortunately nothing fatal, so rather than trying to turn back with an aircraft that I cannot turn with, I continue through the vertical and then throttle down to stall turn the Airacobra back onto the target so I can re-dive. I've already done damage to the Ki-61, however there's an undamaged Zero down here, and it is a far more dangerous aircraft to engage, so go for it next. Now you will notice I am firing the machine guns and the 37mm cannon together. I am not separating the two. This is largely because, well, I don't rely on the 37mm cannons in any of the American armed Airacobras, 37mm armed Airacobras. A6M2 lined up, first hits through and fireballed. Try and switch straight over to the Ki-61, however it's going to outturn me, so take the plane into the vertical before rolling it over. Wide angle turn to dive back. I've got shots coming in from behind, but I'm not particularly worried at the moment. The aircraft attempting to follow me doesn't seem to have a very good lead, and I am faster in a straight line. 37mm cannon has ran out, but as I said I don't rely on that, and I'll come to that in a moment. Down to 64 rounds of ammunition left in the MGs. It's one of the big faults of this aircraft. Its 50 caliber machine gun ammunition load is not particularly large. It only carries 400 rounds of ammunition, or 200 rounds per machine gun, so you really need to be sparing on those. A good hit and fireball on the Gaijins, but it's time for me to get out of here. I've taken critical damage to the right hand aileron, my engine is overheating, and I'm down to 7 rounds of ammunition. I have to take this thing back to base, and I've got to do it now. So as I was saying, the 37mm cannon in this aircraft, I do not rely on it at any time. I really only find it useful for anti-bomber work, and occasionally in short shots to keep your accuracy up in head-on passes. Outside of those two situations, most of the time I find the 37mm suffers from severe sparking. It's just not a weapon I can rely on. Lining up the shots to put this 37mm into a target, only to see it spark on a perfect hit, is possibly one of the most infuriating things that you'll ever encounter in War Thunder, so I just don't use them. Whenever I'm lining up a shot, I'm lining up shots for the 50 calibers, not for the 37. If the 37 happens to hit and happens to kill, that's just a bonus. What I do like keeping those cannons firing for, however, is 37mm rounds tend to have very, very, very large traces, and they have a very distinctive doof sound as they fire, and a sound when they go past. The 37mm cannon is very good to keep firing, even if it's not going to hit the target, for intimidation. When you're being fired on by a gun that large, you know those shells are coming in, and it does tend to make pilots a little squeamish. They tend to go very evasive in manners that will generally cause them to lose speed, potentially bringing them back into a position where I can put the 50 calibers on target. So to everybody who's going to ask in the comments, that's why I'm firing the 37mm. It's not to kill targets, it's just to scare the crap out of them. So I've begun to turn back towards the battlefield despite my damage and low ammunition count, and that's because, well, our team's been slaughtered. There's only 4 of us left, and the only 2 kills taken by our team so far are mine. We have an A6M2 that is moving in on an LA5, and I need to convince him to break off to try and keep that LA5 alive, and this turns out to be probably the most important decision I make in this entire match. So the A6M2 sees me coming. I take him to the vertical, he follows through, I fire off the last of my ammunition. Now he doesn't know that's the last of my ammunition, so he continues to maneuver. I continue to maneuver as I'm trying to bring guns onto target. As he goes past, bring the plane over, push it into a dive, stabilise it, which I actually had trouble due to damage flicking this plane back onto its belly so I could pull away, and head back to base. Now that manoeuvre wasn't much. I didn't do a whole lot there, but just the time I bought the LA5, in order to force this Zero to maneuver against me, bought the LA5 time that it needed to bring itself back around in order to be able to defend itself. And from this point, I just head straight back to base. There is nothing else I can do at this time. Despite the damage, landing the aircraft in this condition was rather easy. Just a nice gentle descent, 42% throttle, brakes after landing, and touchdown perfectly smooth. Now that LA5 that I saved before managed to fight his way out of the engagement and is also returned to base, so he's coming down for a landing now. Unfortunately, the two of us are the last two aircraft remaining in the match, so I'm going to have to take this plane to altitude and begin to engage enemy fighters while I wait for the LA5 to get his repair, his rearm, his reload, and to get back into the fight. Thankfully, they were attacking ground targets, so AAA defensive fire gave me the locations of pretty much the entire enemy team. That does mean, however, I'm going to have to engage the Japanese team in a 4-on-1 fight until the LA5 arrives. So the Ki-61 just went head on and took light damage. It goes into a turn. Now I'm not going to be able to turn with it at this altitude, and I have a second Ki-61 approaching from the right. There's also an A6M-0 down below that I can see strafing ground targets, so I'm going to just boom through continuously on these three aircraft. There is a fourth plane, it's the A6M that I engaged before to break off the back of the LA, and now I haven't been able to find it. At the time I wasn't entirely sure where it went, but in hindsight it's likely that it actually went back to base, which is why it was not present during this initial engagement. Ki-61, this one sees what was coming, maneuvers straight out of the way. Don't try and turn to follow it, dive immediately down on the 0. The 0 goes directly underneath. I'm not going to be able to continue that dive without pancaking, so I'll just use my speed, boom out the other end, hold level flight at just over 600 kilometers an hour to separate a gap between the Ki-61s and the 0 and myself, so they can't get guns on me. And once again I find myself with a cooking engine. Now this plane seems to overheat really easily. It doesn't take much, however, to keep it under control. Back into the vertical, bring the guns back around. If these guys want to go head on, I'm willing to do so. Go for the Ki-61 first, he sees it coming, ducks down, A6M continues climbing forward, takes a 37mm in the nose. One of the few times that I rely on the 37mm to punish people who go head on with aircraft armed with 37mm. So one more plane down, we're down to a 3-on-2 fight and the LA5 has arrived on site. Now I'm just letting the LA5 know I have two on my tail and I'm bringing him straight to him. I'm going to cut in straight underneath him, let him engage the targets, and then take the plane vertical so I can reposition to dive back on the Ki-61s. We've still had no sign of the missing A6M2, however. A minute 17 left on overcook for the engine, so I'm going to have to cool it down soon enough, but just still riding the WEP. It only takes 2 seconds with the throttles on 0 to put this thing back in the amber. Re-dive through, take a shot, light damage again on the Ki-61. LA5, it takes out one of the other Ki-61s. 2-on-2 fight, one Ki-61 remaining. Bring the guns back around. LA5's attempting to open a gap, he maneuvers down and over, presents me with a shot on the Ki-61. Light damage again, nothing too serious. Now I almost make a horrible mistake here, looping the plane over that low to the ground. If this canyon wasn't here, I would have pancaked hard. Thankfully I spot the canyon, put the plane through it, take it straight back into the vertical, re-engage the Ki-61 from underneath. It sees me coming and dips out of the way just slightly. Wide arcing turn, I'm down to 22 seconds. I've got to back off on the throttle. So throttles to 0 and you'll see how quickly this thing cools down. 16 seconds to overheat, already back to amber, and I'm back on the WEP again. I'm good for about another 60 seconds to a minute and a half of flight time without cooking the engine. Now the Ki-61 has been able to use my sudden drop in engine power to manoeuvre back onto my tail. He's going to get guns on me, there's nothing I can do about that at this point, so bring the plane around, push the WEP back over, and go straight underneath the LA5. The LA5 will drop in and engage, and there it is. He's just set the Ki-61 on fire. All I have to do is stay ahead of the Ki-61's guns and let him burn out, and I'm clean and clear. Now I'd just like to mention at this time that this LA5 and myself are not on comms. We are not squatted, and we are barely using the in-game chat function in order to communicate with one another. Actually, looking at the few messages between myself and the LA5 in chat, I'm not entirely sure this LA5 pilot even has English as a main language. Yet we're able to work very well together as a team. This is because he is able to see what I'm doing in my aircraft, I'm able to see what he's doing in his aircraft, and we are manoeuvring in a way that complements one another in this fight. And between the two of us, we've managed to knock this fight down to a 2-on-1 in our favour. The last aircraft is the A6M2. Now this is the number 1 player for the enemy team, so this is not going to be an easy target to take down. So the A6M2 is going to go for the LA5 first, arcs itself over, I attempt to follow with the guns. not quite able to bring it around enough. Throttle back to 48%, combat flaps out so I don't pancake the aircraft. Attempt to follow the plane through. He's continuing to arc around. Now while I'm engaging this Zero, the LA-5 is also jockeying for position. I see I'm not going to be able to continue the turn. I'm damn close to stall speed, push it into the WEP, and I'm going to turn away and dive away. Now that Zero is likely going to follow me, and sure enough it does. But the LA-5 sees this and he moves to fall on the Zero, so all I've got to do is run and stay out of front of the Zero's guns, and the LA-5 gets its crack. So trying to beat the A6M in a roll, it's one of the few things that the Airacobra can actually do against a Zero, and I'm taking a hell of a beating here. But it's okay, all I'm trying to avoid is his 20mm cannons. He can pepper me with the 7.7s all day long, I don't care. It's just those 20mm that will give me issues. Sure enough, he was focused on me so hard, LA-5 got into position and got some shots in on him. He's broken evasive, and he's starting to engage the LA-5, because the LA-5 is now the primary threat. I'm opening up enough of a gap, combat flaps again, I just want to make sure I've got enough lift to bring this around, and I'm going to pull back in behind, and exactly the same as the LA-5 engaged the Zero when it was on my tail, I'm going to engage the Zero now it's on his. Now this is a perfect example of bait and switch tactics, but what blew my mind the most during this battle is I've seen squads on comms that they can't organise this, yet here we are, two people that have never met one another in battle before, just randomly entered in a battle under the matchmaker, and we're able to orchestrate this almost perfectly. Again, light damage on the Zero. Boom out, I'm not going to make the turn. Zero's going to turn back onto me, so I'm going to open the throttle and open the gap so the LA-5 can have a crack. I'm out of 37mm ammo, don't really care. 1 minute 40 on engine overheat. Well, the honest truth is, one way or another, this battle's going to be over in the next minute 40, so it's not really going to make that much of a difference. LA-5 and the Zero go head to head. Zero dodges out of the way, sees me coming, brings it back around, position the guns exactly where he's going to be, pull the trigger, and take out the pilot. And that's the end of the match. So, first place for the team with 4 kills, LA-5 comes in second place with 3, and we score the only kills for the team. Awards were Avenger, Soft Landing, Ground Forces Rescuer X2, Shadow Strike X2, Professional X3, Windstreak X2, Final Blow. I unlocked 3 skins for the Airacobra, which I might take a look at in just a moment. Terror of the Sky and Bulletproof, 111,745 Silver Lions, and we came in with 7,345 research points. Not that I had anything to research. So, not a bad match for my second flyout in the aircraft, and, well, as for performance of the plane, honestly, it's just another Airacobra. It's nothing particularly special about the plane at all. Again, as I said at the start of the match, this isn't a way that I would recommend that you fly your P-39 Airacobra. This was just the kind of thing that I do when I'm testing out an airframe that I either haven't flown before or haven't flown in a very long time. Honestly, engaging Zeros of any kind in a maneuvering battle in any aircraft that isn't also a Zero is, as a general rule, a very good way to get yourself killed. Now, I'd just like to end this video on a question. Now, you saw in that battle, me and the LA-5 were not squatted together at all, and we barely communicated for the entire length of the match, and yet we were able to organise some very good teamwork between the two of us to pull what should have been a loss into a win. Now, you often hear players say that there is no teamwork in random matches in War Thunder. You hear it from a lot of games of this kind. It does actually happen. How often have you as a player, however, missed it? I just want you to have a think about your battles that you've been in recently. How many times has a plane flown towards you? Now, he hasn't asked for help, he hasn't tried to organise help, but he has actually been positioning his aircraft to give you a shot on a target, and you've potentially missed the fact that that's what he was doing. How many times have you yourself gone for assistance from your teammates without having time to ask them in chat, and received none? Sometimes making teamwork work between players doesn't actually require that you talk. It just requires that you observe and see what's going on around you, and the results can lead to massive clutch victories like this one, which was a hell of a lot of fun to fly. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed the video. Click like if you do, subscribe if you want to see more. Fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in the skies.